My true story from Oklahoma. I got them out of debt. Then they moved without telling me. I didn't want applause. I didn't want a parade. I just wanted to know I mattered. I cleared their debts, paid their bills, and one day, they packed their bags and vanished. No goodbye, no address, nothing. But what I did next, they never expected. If you've ever felt forgotten after giving everything, subscribe to this channel. We share true stories from grandmothers who loved too much and were left behind. My name is Lorraine Candler, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a small town outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the wind never stops blowing and the summer heat makes you feel like you're living inside an oven. I've called this place home for 52 years, ever since my late husband Gerald brought me here as his young bride fresh from Arkansas. The house we bought back then cost $8,000 and seemed like a palace to me. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen with yellow countertops that Gerald said reminded him of sunshine. He worked at the oil refinery for 37 years, coming home every evening with his hands stained black and his lunch pail empty. I taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary until our daughter Rebecca was born, then stayed home to raise her properly. We were never rich, but we were careful with money. Gerald would sit at our kitchen table every Sunday evening, paying bills and updating our savings account ledger with his careful handwriting. "Lorraine," he'd say, "we're building something here, something that'll last." He was right. When the cancer took him 8 years ago, his life insurance and our decades of careful saving left me comfortable. Not wealthy, but secure enough to sleep peacefully at night and help my family when they needed it. 3 years ago, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being the mother every daughter deserves. My daughter Rebecca and her husband Mark were drowning in debt. Credit cards, medical bills, a mortgage they couldn't afford on their dream house in the suburbs of Broken Arrow. They had 2 beautiful children, my grandchildren Emma and Jacob, and watching them struggle broke my heart into pieces. Rebecca called me crying one Tuesday evening in March, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside, where hope used to live before bills and stress crushed it flat. "Mom, we're going to lose everything. The bank is foreclosing in 60 days. Mark lost his job at the manufacturing plant, and I can't cover everything on my teacher's salary. We don't know what to do anymore." I sat in my kitchen, staring at the checkbook I kept in the drawer next to the sink where Gerald used to stack his work gloves. The same kitchen where we'd planned our modest dreams and celebrated Rebecca's report cards and worried through her teenage years. Now my grown daughter was falling apart, and I had the power to catch her. "How much do you need?" I asked, already knowing deep in my heart that I'd give whatever it took. The number made my chest tight and my hands shake. $47,000, more than I'd ever spent on anything except our house and Gerald's final medical bills. But Rebecca was my only child, and Emma and Jacob were my heart walking around outside my body, living in a world that seemed determined to hurt the people I loved most. "Mom, I know it's a lot," Rebecca said through her tears, "but we've looked at everything. The mortgage company wants $12,000 to bring us current. The credit cards need about $15,000 to settle. Mark's medical bills from his back surgery are another $8,000. Then there's the car payments, utilities we're behind on, and just basic living expenses until he finds work again." I closed my eyes and saw 10-year-old Emma's face when she'd shown me her perfect spelling test. I remembered 6-year-old Jacob climbing into my lap to hear stories about princes and dragons. These children deserved stability. They deserved grandparents who could protect them from adult worries and fears. "I'll help," I said. "We'll figure this out together." Over the next 6 months, I wrote check after check, each one feeling like a small prayer sent into the universe. The mortgage company got $12,000 to bring them current, and I'll never forget the relief in Rebecca's voice when she called to tell me the foreclosure notice had been withdrawn. Credit card companies got $15,000 to settle their accounts, and suddenly Mark could sleep at night without panic attacks about minimum payments. Medical bills ate up another $8,000, but at least Mark could walk into that doctor's office with his head held high. Car payments, utility bills, groceries when Mark was between jobs, school supplies for the children, even a small amount for Christmas presents. It all added up to exactly what Rebecca had calculated, plus a little extra for breathing room and unexpected expenses. I didn't touch my retirement accounts. but I emptied my savings account that had taken Gerald and me 40 years to build. When that wasn't quite enough, I took out a small personal loan against the house Gerald had left me, using his life insurance policy as collateral. The banker, Mr. Patterson, had known our family for decades. "Mrs. Candler, you sure about this? That's a lot of money to lend to family." "It's not a loan," I corrected him. "It's a gift. My daughter needs help, and I have the means to help her." He nodded slowly, but I saw the concern in his eyes. Mr. Patterson had probably seen too many generous parents learn hard lessons about money and family. To make the numbers work, I changed my entire life quietly and without complaint. I stopped eating out at the little diner where Gerald and I used to have Sunday breakfast. I started buying generic groceries and clipping coupons like my mother had during the Depression. I wore the same 3 church dresses in rotation and told people I was simplifying my wardrobe. The sacrifice felt good, meaningful, like I was finally using my resources for something that truly mattered. My own needs seemed so small compared to theirs. What did I need with restaurant meals when I could cook perfectly well at home? What did I need with new clothes when my old ones were still perfectly serviceable? What did I need with a savings account when my daughter's family was struggling? "Mom, you're saving our family," Rebecca said when I handed her the final check on a warm September afternoon. "We'll never forget this. You'll always be part of everything we do. Holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners. We're going to make sure you never feel alone again." Mark nodded enthusiastically, pumping my hand like I'd just negotiated world peace. "Mrs. Candler, you're an angel sent from heaven. We'll have you over every week for dinner. The kids can spend summers with you like I used to with my grandparents. We'll take care of you the way you've taken care of us." Emma hugged my waist tight and looked up with those bright blue eyes she'd inherited from Gerald. "Grandma Lorraine, you're the best grandma in the whole world. I'm going to take care of you when you're really old." Even little Jacob, who was usually too busy with toys and cartoons to pay attention to adult conversations, wrapped his arms around my neck. "Thank you for saving our house, Grandma." I believed them completely. When you love someone with your whole heart, you want to believe their promises are as real and lasting as your sacrifices. You want to believe that generosity creates gratitude, that helping people makes them want to help you back, that love is always returned in the same measure it's given. For a while, it seemed true. They invited me to Emma's 8th birthday party, and I brought her favorite chocolate cake with pink roses made from buttercream frosting. I came to Jacob's Little League games and cheered from the bleachers when he hit his first home run. We had Thanksgiving dinner together, and I brought my famous green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top, and Mark asked for seconds while telling me it was better than his own mother's recipe. Rebecca called me every few days, updating me on Mark's job interviews and the children's school projects and their plans to refinish the hardwood floors in their living room. She sent me photos of Emma's school play and Jacob's science fair project. I felt included, valued, like I was truly part of their daily lives in a way I'd never been before. Christmas that year was magical. They insisted I spend Christmas Eve at their house, and Emma had made me a ceramic mug in art class painted with purple flowers and "World's Best Grandma" in crooked letters. Jacob gave me a drawing of our whole family standing in front of their house, with me right in the center wearing a crown because grandmas are like queens. Mark and Rebecca gave me a beautiful photo album filled with pictures of all of us together, with a note that read, "For the woman who saved our family, with love and gratitude always." I went home that night feeling like the richest woman in Oklahoma, not because of money, I had very little left, but because I had a family that appreciated me, needed me, wanted me around. I had grandchildren who ran to me with excitement and a daughter who called me her hero. But slowly, subtly, like fog rolling in across the prairie, things began to change. The weekly dinners became every other week, then monthly, then every few months, with apologies about busy schedules and work obligations and the children's activities. My phone calls started going to voicemail more often, and when Rebecca did call back, the conversations felt shorter, more distracted. When I'd drive by their house, I'd see cars in the driveway and lights on inside, but my invitations to stop by were met with, "Oh, we were just heading out to run errands," or "Maybe next weekend, Mom. Mark's got a project he needs to finish." I started calling ahead instead of just dropping by, but somehow it was never a good time. I told myself they were busy rebuilding their lives. Young families have so much going on, especially when they're trying to get back on their feet financially. Mark had found a new job with better pay and more responsibilities. Rebecca was considering a master's degree program that might lead to a promotion. I should be happy they were moving forward, not clingy about seeing them as much as we used to. But something felt wrong in my chest, like a small stone of worry that grew heavier each day. When I called Emma to ask about her school play, she seemed confused and distant. "Grandma Lorraine? Mom said we might not see you for a while because you've been sick." Sick? I hadn't been sick a day in 3 years. I was healthier than I'd been in decades, probably because I was walking more and eating better and feeling useful again. Why would Rebecca tell the children I was sick? That afternoon, I drove to their house with a container of Emma's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones with extra vanilla that she always said tasted like birthday cake. No one answered the door, even though I could see both cars in the driveway, and I was certain I'd seen movement behind the living room curtains. I knocked again, waited, called out that it was just me with cookies for the children. Nothing. I left the container on their front step with a note and drove home feeling confused and hurt in ways I couldn't fully understand. The realization hit me like a physical blow the next morning when I found the unopened container of cookies on my own front porch. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, they were avoiding me like I was some kind of burden, some embarrassing relative they needed to hide from their new, improved life. I started paying closer attention after that, though I felt ashamed of myself for doing it. I drove past their house on different days, at different times, trying to understand what was happening. Sometimes cars were there, sometimes not. I left voicemails that weren't returned for days, then weeks. I sent text messages that were read. I could see the read receipts, but never answered. I tried to friend them on Facebook, but my requests went ignored. I could see Rebecca's profile picture when I searched for her, but I couldn't see any of her posts or photos. It was like I'd been quietly erased from their digital life while they continued posting updates and pictures for everyone else to see. The holidays came and went without invitations. Halloween passed, and I didn't get to see Emma and Jacob in their costumes. Thanksgiving was spent alone at my kitchen table with a frozen dinner, wondering what I'd done wrong. Christmas morning, I sat by my phone waiting for calls that never came. Emma's 9th birthday passed without acknowledgement. I sent a card with $20 inside, but I never knew if she received it. Jacob's baseball season started without my presence in the stands, and when I called the school to ask about game schedules, they told me only immediate family members were allowed access to that information. Immediate family. As if I wasn't immediate enough, despite being the person who'd saved their house and their credit and their children's stability. On a cold Tuesday morning in February, exactly 11 months after that last Christmas together, I drove past their house and saw something that stopped my heart completely. A for sale sign in the front yard. Not just any sign, a professional realtor's sign with a bright red sold sticker placed diagonally across the top. I parked across the street and stared at that sign until my eyes watered. How long had their house been for sale? How long ago had they sold it? Where were they going? When were they leaving? Did they plan to tell me at all? My hands were shaking as I walked to the front door and knocked. I waited, knocked again, pressed the doorbell and heard it echo inside. Nothing. Complete silence. I cupped my hands against the living room window and peered inside, my breath fogging the glass. Empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no family photos on the mantle, no toys scattered across the floor, no sign that my daughter and grandchildren had ever lived there at all. The walls were bare except for lighter rectangles where pictures had hung. The carpet showed indentations where heavy furniture had once sat. They were gone. My family was gone, and I didn't even know when they'd left. A man emerged from the house next door, carrying a toolbox toward his garage. He was middle-aged with kind eyes, and he looked at me with something like sympathy. "You looking for the Hendersons?" he asked. Hendersons. That was Rebecca's married name, though she'd kept it even after the divorce papers were signed. "Yes, I'm Rebecca's mother. Do you know where they moved?" He shook his head slowly, setting down his toolbox. "They left about 3 weeks ago. Big moving truck came on a Saturday morning. Kids seemed excited about wherever they were going, but Rebecca and Mark didn't say much to any of us neighbors, just that it was time for a fresh start somewhere new. 3 weeks. They'd been gone for 3 weeks, and I hadn't even known. While I'd been calling their phones and wondering why they weren't returning my messages, they'd been living somewhere else entirely, starting their fresh life without me. Did they leave a forwarding address? I asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. No, ma'am. I'm sorry. I asked if they wanted me to hold any mail, but Rebecca said they'd already changed everything with the post office. I thanked him and walked back to my car on unsteady legs, feeling like I was moving through thick water. Everything looked the same. The street, the other houses, the mailbox where I used to send birthday cards. But everything was different. The family I'd saved no longer existed in this place. Maybe they no longer existed anywhere, at least not in any way that included me. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every interaction from the past year, looking for clues I'd missed. Had there been signs? Had I been too pushy, too involved? Had I made them feel guilty about the money? Had I expected too much in return for my help? But what had I expected, really? Weekly dinners seemed reasonable after $47,000. Phone calls returned within a few days seemed normal between a mother and daughter. Holiday invitations seemed like basic courtesy. Being told about a major move seemed like common decency. I hadn't expected gratitude parades or endless thank you notes. I just wanted to matter, to be included, to be part of the family I'd helped save. In my kitchen, I sat at the same table where Gerald and I had planned our modest dreams, where I'd written all those checks, where I'd believed in promises that turned out to be as empty as their abandoned house. I tried calling Rebecca's cell phone one more time, though I knew it was pointless. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service," said the automated voice. "Please check the number and try again." I tried Mark's phone, same message. I searched for them online, on social media, in phone directories, anywhere I could think of. It was like they'd vanished completely, erasing themselves from my life as thoroughly as if they'd never existed at all. But I had existed in theirs. I had $47,000 worth of receipts to prove it. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life since Gerald's funeral. I'd wake up each morning expecting a phone call, a letter, some explanation for their disappearance. Maybe they'd had to move suddenly for Mark's job and hadn't had time to call. Maybe they were planning to surprise me with their new address once they got settled. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation that would make sense of their silence. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, the truth settled over me like a heavy quilt on a summer night. They hadn't forgotten to call. They had chosen not to call. They hadn't lost my phone number. They had decided they didn't want it anymore. They hadn't been too busy to say goodbye. They had deliberately avoided saying goodbye. I spent hours sitting in my living room, staring at the photo album they'd given me that magical Christmas, trying to understand how people could look so genuinely happy and grateful in pictures while planning to disappear from my life forever. Had they been pretending the whole time? Had every smile been false, every hug calculated, every expression of love carefully performed? I wondered what I'd done wrong. Had I been too involved in their lives? Not involved enough? Had I asked too many questions about their finances after helping them? Had I made them feel guilty or obligated in ways that made them uncomfortable? Had I somehow misunderstood the terms of our relationship? But the more I thought about it, the more confused and hurt I became. I'd tried to be helpful without being intrusive, generous without being controlling, loving without being smothering. I'd respected their privacy, supported their decisions, and asked for nothing in return except to be part of their lives in whatever way they felt comfortable. I'd given them everything they'd asked for, and more. In return, they'd given me abandonment, lies, and silence. The anger came slowly, like water seeping through a crack in a foundation. Not at them, though that anger would come later, but at myself. I was angry at how small I'd made myself, how grateful I'd been for scraps of attention, how desperately I'd wanted to matter to people who clearly didn't think I mattered at all. I was angry at how I'd emptied my savings and borrowed against my house to solve their problems while ignoring my own needs. I was angry at how I'd changed my entire lifestyle to accommodate their crisis while they'd been planning their exit strategy. I was angry at how I'd believed their promises and trusted their love and built my future around a family that had no intention of including me in theirs. Most of all, I was angry at how I'd measured my worth by their need for me, how I'd confused being useful with being valued, how I'd thought that giving everything would somehow guarantee receiving something, anything in return. One morning, about 4 months after discovering their empty house, I walked into my bedroom and looked at myself in the full-length mirror Gerald had hung on the closet door 40 years ago. I saw a woman who had spent the last 3 years living on the edges of her own life, waiting for permission to be important to the people she loved most. That woman looked tired, defeated, forgotten. She looked like someone who had given her power away to people who had used it against her. I decided I didn't want to be her anymore. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Harold Jameson, who'd handled Gerald's estate and had been the family's attorney for 25 years. Harold had known Rebecca since she was a little girl, had drawn up the papers when we'd bought our first house, had helped us navigate Gerald's final wishes. "Harold, I need to change my will completely." "Of course, Lorraine. What changes do you want to make?" "I want to remove my daughter and her family as beneficiaries. Everything goes to charity now." There was a long pause on the phone. "Lorraine, that's a very significant change. Are you sure you've thought this through carefully? Family relationships can be complicated, but they can also be repaired." "I've had 4 months to think about nothing else, Harold. My family moved away without telling me where they were going. They changed their phone numbers without giving me the new ones. They've made it very clear that they don't want me in their lives. I'm simply honoring their wishes." Harold sighed. "I have to ask, are you doing this out of anger? Or have you really decided this is what you want?" I thought about his question for a long moment. "Both," I said finally. "I'm angry, and I think I have a right to be angry, but I'm also making a choice about who deserves my resources and my legacy. It should go to people who will value it and use it to help others, not to people who took what they needed and then disappeared." I chose 3 organizations that had meaning for me. The Tulsa Women's Shelter, where women and children rebuild their lives after losing everything to domestic violence, addiction, or economic disaster. The local literacy center, where adults who'd been failed by the education system learn to read and write and reclaim their dignity. And the county library's children's program, where kids who might not have books at home can discover the magic of stories and learning. These organizations helped people who wanted to be helped, who appreciated assistance, who used resources to build better lives rather than simply to escape consequences. These organizations would use my money to create lasting change, not temporary comfort. Harold drew up the papers on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 year after Rebecca had first called me crying about losing everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was signing away her inheritance on the anniversary of the day I'd started giving her everything I had. The second thing I did was volunteer. The literacy center needed tutors, and I taught Sunday school for 20 years before Gerald got sick and needed constant care. I knew how to be patient with people who were learning something difficult, how to break complex ideas into manageable pieces, how to celebrate small victories and encourage people through frustrations. My first student was a woman named Maria, about Rebecca's age, who cleaned office buildings at night and worked at a grocery store during the day. She'd dropped out of school in 8th grade to help support her younger siblings and had never learned to read well enough to help her own children with homework. "I feel so stupid," she said during our first session, staring at a simple paragraph about community gardens. "My 10-year-old reads better than I do." "You're not stupid," I told her firmly. "You're brave. It takes courage to admit you need help, and even more courage to do something about it. Most people just make excuses and give up." We met twice a week in the library's quiet corner, working through phonics and simple sentences, gradually building up to longer passages and more complex ideas. Maria was smart and determined, but she'd been convinced for years that she was too old and too dumb to learn anything new. "Mrs. Candler," she said during our third session, looking up from a paragraph about butterfly migration that she'd just read perfectly. "Why do you do this? Volunteer, I mean. You could be doing anything with your time." I thought about her question, setting down the workbook, and looking at this woman who reminded me so much of myself at her age. Hardworking, devoted to her children, underestimated by the world. "Because everyone deserves to feel capable and valued," I said. And because being useful to someone who wants your help feels completely different than being useful to someone who takes it for granted. Maria smiled, and I saw understanding in her eyes. My children tell me I'm getting smarter every day, but I think maybe I was always smart. I just needed someone to believe in me and show me how to use what I already had. That's when I understood what had been missing from my relationship with Rebecca and Mark. They had needed my money, but they had never needed me. Not really. They had taken my help, but they had never valued the person giving it. They had appreciated what I could do for them, but they had never appreciated who I was. Maria needed my knowledge and experience, but she also valued my time and attention. She thanked me after every session, updated me on her progress with her children, brought me small gifts from her grocery store job. She treated our tutoring relationship like a friendship, not a transaction. The third thing I did was join the library's book club. 12 women between the ages of 50 and 85 who met every other Thursday evening to discuss novels, drink coffee from paper cups, and share stories about their lives. I'd never been in a book club before. Gerald had preferred television and sports, and Rebecca had always been too busy for what she called Mom's boring book discussions. These women were different from anyone I'd spent time with before. They listened when I talked about characters and themes. They asked my opinion about plot twists and actually cared about my answers. They remembered details about my life from previous meetings and followed up on conversations we'd started weeks earlier. "Lorraine," said Janet, a retired nurse who'd become something like a friend, "you have such interesting perspectives on these characters' motivations. Have you ever thought about writing your own stories?" I hadn't. I'd never thought of myself as someone who had stories worth telling. But that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote about a woman who gave everything to her family and received nothing in return. Not gratitude, not respect, not even a goodbye. Writing became my fourth thing. Every morning after breakfast and the newspaper, I'd spend 2 hours putting words on paper. Stories about women like me. Women who had been used, forgotten, taken for granted. But also women who had found ways to matter again, on their own terms. I wrote about a teacher who discovered her principal was stealing from the school fundraiser and had to decide whether to report him. I wrote about a widow who started a business baking pies and found the independence she'd never had during 40 years of marriage. I wrote about a grandmother who learned that sometimes the best way to love someone is to stop enabling their bad choices. The stories poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I'd had so many years of watching, listening, and thinking about human nature, about relationships, about the difference between love and manipulation. I had stories about every woman I'd ever known, every situation I'd observed, every lesson I'd learned the hard way. Janet convinced me to share some of my writing with the book club, and to my amazement, they loved what I'd written. They said my stories felt real, honest, like glimpses into lives they recognized. "You should submit these somewhere," said Clara, the oldest member of our group at 81. "These stories matter. Women need to read about other women who've survived and thrived." I started submitting my stories to small literary magazines and online publications that featured older women's writing. To my shock, some of them were accepted. I began getting emails from readers who said my stories had helped them understand their own situations, had given them courage to make difficult changes in their lives. A year and a half after Rebecca disappeared from my life, something unexpected happened. I was shelving books at the Literacy Center when a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Candler? Maria Santos told me you might be able to help me. I'm trying to get my GED, but I'm really struggling with the reading comprehension part of the practice tests." Her name was Ashley, and she was 22 years old with a 3-year-old daughter named Sophia. Her own mother had abandoned the family when Ashley was 16, leaving her to finish raising herself and help her father with her 2 younger brothers. "I don't want my daughter to grow up ashamed of me," Ashley said during our first tutoring session, her voice breaking slightly. "I want to be someone she can be proud of, someone who can help her with homework and understand what she's learning in school." Working with Ashley reminded me of something I'd forgotten during the dark months after Rebecca's disappearance. The best kind of love isn't desperate or conditional. It doesn't keep score or demand constant gratitude. It simply shows up, consistently and quietly, and trusts that its value will be recognized by people who are capable of recognizing value. Ashley was everything Rebecca had never been. grateful without being servile, independent while still accepting help, honest about her struggles without making them my responsibility to solve. She worked harder than anyone I'd ever taught, staying after our sessions to practice reading aloud, calling to ask questions about things she didn't understand, bringing me updates on her progress, even when we didn't have appointments scheduled. Ashley passed her GED exam 6 months later, scoring higher than she'd ever dreamed possible. At the graduation ceremony, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You changed my life." Her daughter Sophia, a curly-haired little girl with bright brown eyes and an infectious giggle, looked up at me with complete trust and affection. "Are you my grandma now?" she asked, with the matter-of-fact directness that only small children possess. Ashley laughed, but I could see tears in her eyes. "If Mrs. Candler doesn't mind having another granddaughter who actually wants to spend time with her." I knelt down to Sophia's level, feeling my heart expand in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "I would be honored to be your chosen grandma." That evening, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I passed the street where Rebecca's old house stood, where a new family now lived with children who played in the same yard where Emma and Jacob had once run around. I felt a small pang of sadness, remembering the grandmother I used to be, but I didn't miss her. That grandmother had been afraid of being forgotten, afraid of being alone, afraid of not mattering to the people she loved. She had given everything because she thought that's how you earn love and secure your place in other people's lives. The grandmother I am now knows better. Love isn't earned through sacrifice or purchased with generosity. It's freely given and freely received between people who choose each other. It doesn't cost $47,000 or require you to make yourself small and invisible. Real love recognizes your worth without you having to prove it over and over again. Last month, the book club decided to read stories written by local authors. Janet suggested I share some of my writing, and I nervously brought in a story about a woman who learns the difference between being used and being valued. After I finished reading, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Clara spoke up with tears in her eyes. "Lorraine, I wish you were my daughter. Any mother would be lucky to have someone like you in their life." The other women nodded, and several of them wiped their eyes with tissues pulled from purses and pockets. In that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen to know me and value me for exactly who I was, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I belonged. Not because I'd paid for the privilege or sacrificed everything I had, but because I was me, just me, with my stories and my experiences and my willingness to show up for people who wanted me there. That was enough. I was enough. Rebecca never did call. I don't expect her to anymore, and I've made peace with that reality. Sometimes I wonder about Emma and Jacob, whether they remember their grandma Lorraine who used to bring them cookies and teach them card games and cheer at their school events. I hope they do. I hope they remember that someone loved them completely and asked for nothing but their happiness in return. But if they don't remember, that's okay too. My love for them wasn't conditional on their memory of it or their ability to return it. I'm 73 years old, and I've learned that the most important relationship you can have is with yourself. When you know your own worth, you stop giving it away to people who don't value it. When you stop making yourself small to fit into other people's lives, you discover how much space you actually deserve in the world. I matter because I choose to matter. I'm valuable because I decide I'm valuable. And I'm loved, truly, deeply loved, by people who see me clearly and choose me anyway, not because of what I can give them, but because of who I am. That's a gift I never thought I'd receive, but it turns out it was always mine to give myself. I just had to learn how to accept it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and join our community of brave, loving women who refuse to be forgotten.